Hey, this is Joe from HomeStudioCorner.com. I want to talk to you today about something that you hear a lot in mixing advice circles, and it's something I've said before, and it doesn't apply all that often to mixing, except in this one example. And so the piece of advice is this, the idea of carving space for instruments in a mix and, cutting one frequency from one instrument and boosting that in another instrument to kind of complement each other so they're not sitting on top of each other. There's all this talk of carving space in the mix for each instrument to sit alongside other instruments. I don't find myself doing a lot of that carving where I'm intentionally cutting over here to make room for this instrument over here. I don't do that a lot, except when it comes to electric guitars, specifically just big rhythm guitars that are playing essentially the same part, but need to have some distinction and some separation so you hear them individually. So let me just play a quick snippet of this song where I did this, and then I'll show you what I did with EQ. So just roughly the same part being played doubled left and right, but the parts are fairly different guitars and sounds, and it's not super different. But the first one I believe is like a single coil Telecaster kind of part, and the other one is some sort of humbucker. I think I used an Artcore Ibanez. So a bit thicker sound, and then together they sound pretty good. Now, when you look at the EQs for each of these, and I'll have the Tele on the left, and I'll put the humbucker on the right, what I noticed when I listened to these was that each one has its own kind of signature frequency, if that makes sense. So let me turn the EQs off and let you hear each. So for the Telecaster part, listen to that by itself. Oh, that's the wrong one. Huh, that was the humbucker. Here we go, for the Tele. So it kind of has this kind of the upper mid-range is kind of where it really, really shines. So on that EQ, you'll notice up in here is kind of where most of the tone of that instrument is. Right up in there, right? So what doesn't shine on this part? Well, hang on a second, we'll come back to that. Let's go to the other track, the humbucker, and listen to that without EQ. So what I hear there is it's predominantly, a lot of its tone is down here in the lower mids, that thick humbucker sound. So instead of taking the good of this part and boosting it, I decided to cut it out of the other guitar part. So each one, as we said, the Tele sounds pretty good up here in the upper mids, so I actually cut those upper mids out of this Les Paul, or humbucker guitar. And then over here, where the humbucker guitar sounded really good in the low mids, I took those frequencies and cut them out of the Tele. So I cut them out of each so that each could shine in its own respective strength, if that makes sense. So the Telecaster went from sounding like this to sounding like this with a little more brightness, a little less thickness. No EQ. With EQ. So it just cut a little bit of that low mid action. And then the humbucker guitar, if we play that one, without EQ, it was fairly bright and thick. But with EQ, it kind of warms it up. It gets rid of some of that upper mid-range and makes it a little thicker sounding. So the two together, when we take these EQs away, leave the EQs on, take those windows away, you hear them together, they complement each other a little bit more. Listen to them without EQ. Did you hear that? When I clicked those EQs on, it sounded almost like they got more separation with each other. I'll do it again with no EQ, then I'll click the EQs on and listen to how they seem to almost separate in the stereo field away from each other, and all I've done is added EQ. So the right guitar sounds further to the right, and the left guitar sounds farther to the left. Pretty cool and very subtle. That's all I did on the guitars in this song, and I was able to get them to have more separation in the mix, so they sound like this. One important thing to note is I actually did all this EQing in mono and was able to hear the differences between the two guitar parts even in mono. It's more subtle in mono, but when you flip the EQs on and off, you hear it gets a little less muddy and a little less bright at the same time, which is because of these EQ moves that we did. Then you flip it out to stereo, and there's some great separation there. So that's one of the only times where I'll do kind of complementary EQing, where I intentionally cut one frequency of one instrument to allow another instrument to shine in that spot. So there you go. Hope that's helpful for you next time you're mixing some rock guitars. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next week.